And it's Monday afternoon, 12 o'clock Eastern Time here in Charlotte, North Carolina. But of course, you're in some different time zone listening. So wherever you are, whatever time zone you're in, and whether you're listening to us on the I-95 Sports and Entertainment Network or on one of our podcast platforms, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. We're on most of the major podcast platforms. Either way, welcome to the show. It's Monday. It's the beginning of another week. We're coming to you live from Charlotte, North Carolina on one of those particular situations, whether it's I-95 or if you're listening on one of the podcast platforms, as we said. So we got things to talk about today. NBA really in full swing right now. We have two games on tap today to take a look at to see in which direction the money is flowing, as well as which direction the pros are going. We've got Milwaukee against Brooklyn. We have the Nuggets against the Suns. And of course, once again, for you baseball fans out there, only three games on the agenda today for baseball in the entire league. So none of those three games happen to fall into a betting category that we would want to tell you about. So there's no baseball today, but I'm sure tomorrow, with a full schedule on board, we should have some plays for you tomorrow. But again, always looking at it from the perspective that just want to throw games out at you that we think might win or something of that nature. We're staying within a pattern. That's what's important. You set a plan, you stay with it. If you don't have a bet, you don't have a bet. There's always tomorrow, and there's always room to bet in the near future. So anyway, that's the story. Just want to explain that to you. I know we got some emails once again, like we usually do whenever we don't have baseball on the menu. But that's the story. So kind of explaining it that way. So we're not just throwing something out at you. We don't want you to lose. We want you to help you win. And in that particular situation, if there's nothing to bet on, there's no sense in saying anything about it as well. So we will take a look at situations for tomorrow. We do have a full schedule on tap for tomorrow. I'm sure, like I said, one, two, maybe three games will fall into that category as far as betting is concerned. So that's the story. Once again, today we're also going to, like I said, we're going to look at the two games in the NBA and some big news coming up. I mean, normally we start each show off by talking about what happened the day before. But in this particular instance, because of that big trade that happened yesterday, that's going to be the topic of our conversation to start with. Because, for weeks, it seems like longer than that, we've known that the Falcons were shopping their star wide receiver, Julio Jones, but we just didn't know which team he's going to go to. There was all types of speculation as to where he might go. He might go to the New England Patriots. They were talking about going out to Oakland and talking about coming to Tampa Bay, things of that nature. Also, one of the big numbers that started coming up towards the end were the Tennessee Titans. One thing was for sure, everyone pretty well much agreed that as far as this trade, when it was going to come off, and we knew it was going to happen. I mean, he's unhappy. They're ready to move on with their situation. So we all knew that he definitely wasn't going to be going to an NFL team. Again, you don't want to trade somebody to a competitor within your league so that if he does exceptionally well, and especially if he comes back and beats you in a game, it kind of makes you look kind of terrible. So they did get him out of the National Conference into the American, of course, with the Tennessee Titans. Because early yesterday, the news broke that the Falcons did trade Jones to Tennessee in exchange for a second-round pick in 2022 and a fourth-round pick in 2023. With Jones now in the fold, the Titans now have a potentially dangerous offensive core. You have Ryan Tannehill, a quarterback who's been doing very, very well. You got Derrick Henry as a running back, and you know how great he is. You have A.J. Brown and Jones as well now enters into that situation. So, of course, putting all that together, the sports books were really quick to adjust the odds in favor of the Titans because of the trade. We said, keep an eye on it. If you were lucky enough to pick the Titans and you made an early move on it, you picked up a half a point here or there. The Titans moved from being a plus 110 to a plus 105 to win the division. That's at BetMGM, and that made Tennessee a slight dog, from being a slight dog to being almost a co-favorite alongside the Colts as well. So they kind of moved up pretty well in that ladder, and of course they're in that division where you've got 4 games that they're going to play. You have 2 against Jacksonville. You're going to play 2 games against Houston. So it looks like you may be starting off with 4 wins in your pocketbook. But, you know, we've seen things change. We've seen things go the other way. Injuries happen. Things happen of that nature. But from the looking into it right now, they look pretty good. And, of course, they're almost like co-favorites along with the Colts in that division. The Titans moved from being a plus 2,200 to a plus 1,200. That's a big move to win the AFC, and a plus 4,000 to a plus 2,500 to win the Super Bowl. Now, some of the shops even have the Titans win total up a half a win from 9 to 9.5. Although we do see that the under 9.5 is being juiced up to minus 120, which means there's a lot of money coming in at that level. There aren't that many people that seem to believe that 9.5 is a good enough number. It may drop back down to number after a while. Remember, last season the Titans went 11-5, and if we take a quick look at that schedule that we kind of mentioned for a moment before, they start out against Arizona, then they have Seattle, Indianapolis, New York, Jacksonville, Buffalo, Kansas City. Then they come to Indianapolis again. Then they go out to play the Rams. Then they play New Orleans, Houston, New England, Jacksonville, Pittsburgh, San Francisco, Miami, and Houston. And, you know, from the outset, it kind of looks like the 2 Jacksonville games and the 2 games against Houston should be a win for them. But again, stranger things have happened. So that's the story. The big news, the Titans get Julio Jones, improved their team dramatically, moved them up the ladder as far as their potential and their odds of winning their particular conference goes up, and we'll see how it turns out as we go along. Okay, so that's the story. That's the big story. So we're going to be talking about what happened yesterday. But first of all, let's take that first break. And of course, like we said before, if you've ever listened to the show in the past, you know that we do take 3 breaks. Each one is of 1 minute duration. So we will be back into the sports wagering zone, where we'll talk about things that happened yesterday as far as betting was concerned in the world of sports. We'll be back in the zone in 60 seconds. And welcome back. Welcome back into the sports wagering zone. I'm Chris Pardo. I'm here in Charlotte, North Carolina, right here on the I-95 Sports and Entertainment Network. Also podcasting on most of your podcast platforms, such as Apple Podcast or Amazon Music Podcast or iHeartRadio. So anyway, we're on most of the major podcasts. No need to going into all the details on those as well. So we started off the show by talking about the Titans trade, picking up Julio Jones from the Atlanta Falcons. Not much has really been come out on the other end as to what's going to be happening with the Falcons as far as their numbers are concerned. They kind of pretty well stay the same. But we'll see what happens over the next couple of days. I'm sure there'll be some sort of a little change going in a downward direction, if not. So we'll keep an eye on it. We'll let you know what's going on. In the meantime, let's take a look and see what happened yesterday as far as betting was concerned. Take a look and see how the underdogs did, how the pros did, how also the dogs did. The favorites did. So let's take a look, first of all, at the National Hockey League. The Golden Knights, a minus 115 on the money line, beat the Colorado Avalanche 5-1. And now they tied up their second round series at 2-2, with the home team winning so far. And the number went over 5.5 goals. 5-1. 5.5 was the number. Now, earlier, the Canadians, a minus 120 on the money line, beat the Jets 5-1, and then they take a 3-0 lead in their series. And, of course, it went over the over 5 as well. So, favorites and overs both went 2-0 yesterday. The favorites finally take the slight lead in this second round, 8-7, and now they lead overall in the playoffs of 31-26. The home teams also now have an 8-7 lead in this round, and they overall still lead by a slight margin, 31-29. The overs and unders, they were tied 7-1 so far in this round, but the unders lead overall at 52.5%. So that's the National Hockey League. Meanwhile, in the NBA, action. Clippers, 6.5 point dogs, 6.5 point favorites, covered 126-111. They beat the Mavericks in game 7 of their first round series, and the over was 2-11, so that went over with no problem. The favorites finished the first round as 30-13 straight up, but 28-15 against the spread. They finished up the first round at 65.1%. The home teams went 22-21 against the spread, and the Zigzag went 15-20 against the spread. The Zigzag, as usual, in the 40s, but this time even in the lower 40s, 42.9%. The overs went 23-19. The Hawks, being a 5-point dog, being plus 170 on the money line, upset the 76ers 128-124 in game 1 of their second round series. The overall, the favorites are 31-14 straight up, 29-16 against the spread. That's over 64% so far in the playoffs. Now, home teams, they lead, but only 23-22 against the spread. The overs are 24-20, which is 54.5%. So those are the numbers as far as the NBA is concerned. And like I said, we do have 2 games that we're going to take a closer look at. The Milwaukee Bucks against the Brooklyn Nets, and of course the Denver Nuggets against the Suns. So those are the 2 games we're going to be taking a look at. Meanwhile, in Major League Baseball, the underdogs, they went 8-7 with the biggest upset by the Red Sox. And that was a game that, if you read about it, there was controversial call, a strike call that was called in the 9th inning that kind of got everybody upset and angry. Red Sox wound up winning the game, being a plus 140 on the money line. The Mariners were a plus 140 against the Angels. The Mets were a plus 137 against the Padres. However, the favorites, they still lead 56% on the season so far. The unders went 8-6-1 yesterday, and they retake the lead 426 to 424. It's only 2 games, so it's no big change. So that's the story as far as baseball, the NBA, and of course the NHL is concerned. And we have 2 games, like I said, we're going to talk about today. Now, of course, yesterday we had 2 plays that we talked about as far as how the pros were going. The one game, Dallas against the Clippers, they had the Clippers in that game. Of course, that was a win. Now, the Hawks and the 76ers, before we left you at the end of the show, it was still uncertain. Some of the pros were on the Hawks and some of them were on the 76ers. So, and a lot of it had to do whether or not Joel Embiid played. Of course, he did wind up playing, and they still wound up losing. So we're not going to count that as a win or a loss. Could have gone either way. We kind of left it up to you to keep an eye on the numbers. Of course, they were a big underdog in that game as far as the Hawks were concerned. So maybe you might have wanted to lean in that direction because it moved up from 3.5, up to 5.5, even gone to 6 at some of the places as well. So that's the story for yesterday. And of course, as we look at the totals for the entire season, as far as the pros and their picks, we had 34 selections. And once again, we're not counting the Hawks 76ers in either direction as a win or a loss. That was a toss-up. We left it up to you to go which way you wanted to go. But they did have the Clippers, so we had 34 plays, 25 winners, and astounding, and I believe me, 73.5% so far this season. Meanwhile, the favorites so far in the playoffs were at 64%. So you kind of see the big difference. And although we did pick a lot of favorites as the games were going along, there were a couple of dogs that came into play. That's why it made that percentage higher than just betting favorites alone. So that's the story. We're going to take our second break. And of course, when we do come back, we're going to take a look at those 2 games, try to get an idea as to the line movement in the games, and kind of give you an idea as to which direction the pros are thinking in those 2 games as well. And then later on in the show, we're going to talk about streaks, betting on streaks. Do you bet on streaks? Do you not bet on streaks? We'll kind of give you our thoughts and ideas on that particular subject. So let's take that break. And just to let you know, you're in the sports wagering zone, and we'll be back right after this. And welcome back. Welcome back to the Sports Wagering Zone. I'm Chris Pardo coming to you live from Charlotte, North Carolina, right here on the I-95 Sports and Entertainment Network, as well as on most of your podcast platforms as well. So let's take a look at the two games on tap for tonight. We're taking a close look at trying to see the line movement and kind of try to see which direction the pros are going in these two games. To start with, at 7:30 tonight, Eastern Time, of course, the Milwaukee Bucks in Brooklyn to play the Nets once again. This is game two of the Eastern Conference semifinals. The Nets, they lead the series 1-0 because they won the opener 115-107. They were 3.5-point home favorites in that game, and they covered with no problem at all. The unders, 239.5, all cashed in as well. Now, tonight's rematch opened with Brooklyn, listed as a 2-point home favorite. Now, despite the Nets missing James Harden, because he's going to be out because of that hamstring, the public is still going out there and laying the short spread and taking the home favorite, the Brooklyn Nets. However, and there's always a however, despite this lopsided support, we've seen Brooklyn's number drop from being a 2 to a 1.5-point favorite. And when you see movement like that, it means that the pros are using what we call a reverse line movement on the Bucks. So the pros in this situation, once again, are on Milwaukee and the points. Ideally, if you could get 2, that would be the best way to go if you can. That's why we always insist, we tell you, work with at least three sports books in your area so that you can get the best line possible. Now, of course, the other day when this game took place between Milwaukee and the Nets, the pros were on Milwaukee in that game. Of course, that was a losing situation as far as betting on the Bucks was that day. But they also have value in this game. They're a contrarian road dog in what is going to be a heavily bet primetime game. A lot of people are going to be watching this game. A lot of money is going to be coming in. We've also seen some pro money going on the under in this game because the total opened at 234.5. It's dropped down 1 point to 233.5. Now, so far in this postseason, whenever you saw totals of 230 or higher, the under is 4-2, and that's 67% for the playoffs so far. Now, leading the series 1-0, the Nets are still minus 225 on the money line as favorites to go on into the next round. On the other side, the Bucks are plus 175 as dogs on the money line to come back and win the series. So once again, in this particular game, just as they did the last time, the pros are on the underdog in this game, the Milwaukee Bucks against the Brooklyn Nets. Meanwhile, the late game tonight, the Denver Nuggets take on the Lakers Killers Phoenix Suns. This is game one of that Western Conference semifinal. Now, both of these teams, they're both coming off of 4-2 series wins, with the Nuggets taking down the Blazers, and of course, the Suns just kind of beating the Lakers and kind of pushing them aside as well. Now, tonight's line opened with Phoenix, a short 4-point home favorite. So it looks as though the pros and the general public in this one are both on the same team, laying the points with the Suns because we've seen Phoenix get bet up from 4 to 4.5. Now, some shops are even going at 5, so check with your local situation as to where it is, but it seems to be going in that direction. Now, essentially, all the liability seems to be on the Suns' side. The shorts favorites of being 5 points or less are at 69% this season as far as the postseason is concerned. -5 or less, they're at almost 70%. Now, looking at the total, it opened at 219.5 and hasn't moved in either direction. So, once again, statistically, when the total is 220 or less, the under is 67% in the postseason. So, these teams met 3 times during the regular season. The Nuggets won 2 games, lost 1. The combined totals of those games were 232, 256, and 209 in the final game. The Suns are minus 190 on the money line as favorites to win the series. The Nuggets, they're at a plus 155 as a dog to win this series against the Suns. So as far as this game is concerned, the pros and the general public all seem to agree the Phoenix Suns are the team to bet. Keep in mind, however, the totals we talked about. Remember that whenever you see certain scores in history kind of, proves itself out many times. It's not 100%. It's only 69%, or maybe it's 68%. So there's always that factor. It's never 100%. There's always something, but you got to kind of look at those kind of things. So again, favorites of 5 points or less are at 69% in the postseason. So kind of keep that in mind. And also, if you're betting the totals, if the total is less than 220, the under is at 67% so far in the playoffs. So again, these teams met 3 times before. Those totals were 232, 256, and ended up being 209. So that's the story with this game. And as far as the pros and the general public is concerned, they all like the Phoenix Suns in this series. In the meantime, that earlier game we talked about, the Milwaukee Bucks and the Brooklyn Nets, the pros in that game are on the Milwaukee Bucks once again to win tonight, because Harden will not be playing with Brooklyn, but you have to decide how important that is. They played pretty good the other day when he got hurt, although he was in there for a while. Now he's not even going to start right from the beginning, so perhaps that might lead in the direction of the Milwaukee Bucks, and probably the reason why the pros are leaning in that direction as well. So that's the story. And like I said, as far as the pros are concerned, they're at 73.5% going into today's game. Yesterday, we had one winner with the Clippers. The other game, like we said, it was too close to call on either side, so we kind of left it up to you as to which way you wanted to go. So that's the story for today. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to talk a little bit about betting streaks. Do you bet them? Sometimes, always, never, whatever the story is. We'll try to give you a little insight into that as well. So once again, thank you very much for listening. We're going to take our break. We'll be back into the zone in 60 seconds. And welcome back. Welcome back to the Sports Wagering Zone. I'm Chris Pardo. Thank you very much for listening. And if you want to get a hold of us, it's not very hard. Just simply send an email and send it to the Sports Wagering Zone at gmail.com. gmail.com. That's the sports wagering zone at gmail.com. If you have any comments about the show, glad to hear about them. Again, we've been doing the show for well over 5 years now, and we kind of stay to a certain way of the way we do things. Though we do change as the time goes, because we had an important message to talk about as far as the trade was concerned. But normally we do start out by talking about what happened the day before. Of course, we went back to that, and we give you all that information as well. But if there's some comment you have, maybe we talked too much about some things, maybe not enough about something else, kind of let us know. Just drop us a line. The Sports Wagering Zone at gmail.com. Now let's talk about betting hot teams and cold teams. It is many times you take a look, you see teams getting hot, teams getting cold, and so you're trying to figure out, maybe I want to bet this game, but I just don't know what should I be doing in this situation. And that's human nature, generally speaking, because in baseball, I don't consider a team streaking until there are wins and losses against more than one team, okay? Because if you sweep a bad team or you get swept by a great team for 3 or 4 games, that doesn't mean as much as if a team continues to streak at another series. So that's when I kind of take a closer look to jump on the bandwagon. So if you've watched or listened to us throughout the past few years, you find out that we talk about streaks. Sometimes we're for them, sometimes we're against them. It just all depends. Once again, we give you both sides of the picture so that you can make the final decision yourself. Because the key in this whole situation is to find the ones that will last, and you don't want to jump in too late, because it's also important because you don't want to be fading a streak. Now, a friend of mine calls fading a streak, which means getting away from one, is like getting in front of a train. Okay. There's another old saying: if you're fading a streak, you can lose many times. But if you're backing a streak, you only lose once. Okay. So in my mind, this is the best illustration that I could think of. There was a TV show called The Simpsons. It still goes on. Most of them are replays. When Krusty the Clown was asked the question why he bet against the Harlem Globetrotters. Now, some of you younger people out there may not understand or know who the Harlem Globetrotters were, but they were a fun team to watch. It was like an exercise in watching a fun game, because the outcome didn't really make any difference, although you knew they were going to win regardless. There's very rarely where the Harlem Globetrotters ever lost. And Krusty the Clown replied, because he thought the Generals, which was the other team they always played, were due to win. So you don't want to be caught in being that clown. You don't want to be caught in the thought of saying, well, it's time for them to win, or they won too many games. It's time for them to lose. So we've seen several baseball streaks so far. The A's, they had a 13-game winning streak back in April. The Rays had an 11-game streak, while the Diamondbacks just ended a 10-game skid last weekend. Entering Saturday, the Royals had the longest winning streak, which was 5, and the Marlins had the longest downward streak at 7. So plenty of opportunities will exist to jump on the bandwagon by betting straight on those that continue their streaks. Or if you're like me and don't like eating all that chalk, you parlaying the ones you like the best. So the other part of the streak betting is that once a team is on a long losing streak, that's of, say, 6 games or more in a sport that wins games, you look to bet on it to win again. Okay. This is called the swagger theory. Okay. We often see teams like this get their swagger after snapping a losing streak, and they win another game. Okay. It works the other way as well. We call that the anti-swagger play. That's a team that has a long winning streak. They finally snap it, and they often have a letdown, and they drop a second game. This works really especially well when you're talking about college football as well. So my advice is to check the standings, the Major League standings every day. See which teams are streaking and bet them accordingly. But also be on the lookout for those swagger and anti-swagger spots as well. So happy streaking. I hope that information was of some help to you. We're here to try to help you. If you have any questions on it, by all means, just drop us an email at sent to the sports wagering zone at gmail.com. The sports wagering zone at gmail.com. So taking a look back again on the selection for today, no baseball selections, only 3 games being played in the major leagues. None of those 3 games fit into the category, the patterns, whatever you want to call it, where the pros would be looking at, they look at and they see something going on. Those are only 3 games, and there's nothing going on in those 3. So we're not going to just throw some games out at you and hope that they win the game. Okay. So hopefully tomorrow, full schedule. I'm sure we'll have something to talk about in baseball for tomorrow. But meanwhile, basketball, that's the big topic of discussion today. Milwaukee and Brooklyn, the pros like the underdog in this game once again. They like Milwaukee against Brooklyn because of Harden's injury, and he's not going to be playing at all today. Meanwhile, in the Nuggets-Suns game, that particular game is agreed upon by not only the pros, but also the general public. They all seem to be on the Suns. So those are the stories on the 2 games on tap for today. The pros like Milwaukee in the first game. The pros and the general public like the Suns in game 2. So once again, thank you very much for listening. We're here every day, Monday through Friday, 12 noon Eastern Time on the I-95 Sports and Entertainment Network. We're also podcasting on, again, most of your podcast platforms. Either way, you can catch us anytime during the day. So if you're going to be betting today, I hope you have the best of luck. I hope you do win. And of course, if you're not, then just sit back, enjoy the games, and have a good day as well. So in order to have a really great day, and if you're betting, you have a nice day as far as the day itself is concerned. And of course, if you're in the profit column, if you pick the winner, you're going to be even happier as well. So once again, thanks for listening. We're here every day, Monday through Friday at noon, Saturdays to Sundays, 11 a.m. So until tomorrow at 12 noon, I'm Chris Pardo, coming to you live from Charlotte on the I-95 Sports and Entertainment Network. Have a very good day. And also, if you're betting, have a profitable day as well. Goodbye, everybody.